we spent a lot of time hopping around Europe yesterday.
Yes.
Japan likes to lean into the old wine world when it comes to, you know, a lot of the places that are going, they're figuring out, you know, how do we communicate sake? They spend time going to France. They go to Italy. They go to the old world. They're trying to figure out, because I mean, it's
when Japan thinks of wine, they think of the old wine world, you know, not the new wine world necessarily.
Yeah, and they're, you know, granted, you know, sake has been around a long time. Sake has traditions, that culture, so it's a fantastic reference point. At the same time, you have new world wine markets with all kinds of vitality that aren't necessarily, I don't want to say restrained, but they're, you know, they're dynamic in ways that maybe the old world wine isn't quite as often or is able to. It's starting to change. But alongside that, and this is kind of a big one we're focusing on today, is the craft beer market. In a lot of those places, so kind of thematically, we're looking at brewing communication. Sort of the theme, brewing communication, the new world. So there's a new world in terms of wine, but it's also craft beer. Everybody likes to kind of shift it into the wine category, but not a lot. But reality is a lot of people are drinking beer.
Is the cousin, really, if you're going to go there, right?
And nobody, you know, it's not that they didn't want to admit it, but there's all these wine analogies and comparisons for a long time. But at the end of the day, when you ask people now, they're finally getting around to, so what is sake? They're kind of going, well, when it comes, it's actually closer to beer. You know,
well, the way it's made anyway.
From a production standpoint. And now the craft beer market is, you know, it's incredibly explosive.
At one point, we were actually fearful of the craft beer market, right? We thought in Japan it would perhaps come and kind of take the spotlight from sake.
I mean, it has.
It has to an extent.
It has.
Yeah, it has.
There's more craft beer breweries popping up. It seems like every other week here in Japan. Really until recently.
But perhaps we can work together.
Yeah, right? I mean, that's the idea. So, you know, we want to kind of delve in. So we got a couple of guests, a couple of Kiwis here, one based in Japan, and one tuning in with us on the ground in New Zealand. We're going to kind of examine what that looks like. So if we can get our guests, let's see if they are out there with us. Oh, how we doing? We tied into everybody?
Hello.
There they are. There they are. How you doing this afternoon, gentlemen?
How you doing?
Good.
Not too bad. Not too bad. We're hanging in here. We're in the midst of a marathon here. We're coming down to the final stretch. Just a couple hours left. Andrew, it sounds like you're in a bit of a marathon at the moment.
Oh, we just finished our biggest beer festival of the year, Beervana in Wellington. We're based in Auckland, but I'm Wellington born and bred. So Behemoth Brewing has been doing this festival for 7 years, and it's 2 days worth of 2 sessions, and it's a pretty crazy few days, set up, packed down, and a big beer festival. So today's been our kind of wind down day, but we might have had a few libations to help us recover.
Yeah.
So excuse the odd slur, but I always thought talking about the alcohol industry is better after a few drinks.
Yeah. Cheers.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Authenticity.
We're with you on that. We're with you on that.
A few slurs makes it
Yeah.
authentic.
Cheers. And Wayne, I'm going to come back to you in just a second here, Andrew. I want you to tell us a little bit about what it is that keeps you busy aside from just beer festivals. But I want to touch base with Wayne here real quick. Wayne Shannon, so you're based in Japan.
Yes.
Running Zangitoto, the craft sake and New Zealand wine bar here in Tokyo.
Yes.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about where it is you're coming from and how you ended up there.
Well, I'm not going to lie, we didn't build a pandemic into our business plan, so we've had to change it, which in hindsight was pretty stupid, but we've had to change some focuses and things like that. But the original plan was to take advantage of a Rugby World Cup and an Olympics. And I've got experience having worked with sake for quite a while and a bit of time in some breweries. And I'm a certified wine sommelier, and the idea of the venue is kind of to make it more accessible for everybody. Like where if you come to Japan and you need to speak to somebody who speaks English and kind of explain, we were hoping to be able to do that a little bit, and also just to get across to people how if you drink wine, you should be drinking New Zealand wine. That just makes sense. But Yeah, and give people that chance to actually taste and to talk and hear some of the stories behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, New Zealand wine is more than available here in Japan. It's all over the place in some capacity, but arguably a lot of the market here, it doesn't feel too close to home necessarily, even though it's relatively accessible. And we'll get back to that. I want to talk a little bit more about that here in a moment.
Excellent.
But you've been primarily, before coming and setting up your bar, you were primarily in the wine world, on the ground in New Zealand, Australia, working with wine, sake.
Well, when I first sort of, I guess, discovered sake, I was like a lot of people, and this was in Sydney. A lot of people I know don't like sake because it's not very nice, and then that's the baggage that the industry was kind of carrying. And then when I still remember the first one that I had, and kind of realized, wait a minute, I've just been wrong. So everybody needs to know that if you don't like, if you like alcohol, you like sake. Like that's just, it's diverse enough that there's gonna be something that you're gonna like. And to write off an entire category, whether it's tequila or Chardonnay or sake because of a bad experience you've had, that just means you need somebody to come along and make you recognize that you've made the mistake that you've made that mistake. So at the time, there was very little knowledge of sake in Sydney. Andre Bishop was leading the way down in Melbourne, and there was nobody really for me to talk to. So I came over went to Chicago to study with John's course, went to Tokyo and visited some breweries, and then came back in the winter and did a little bit of work. But yeah, when I was living in Australia and New Zealand, I was primarily the sake guy because there's a lot of wine people. And so if I met a lot of the winemakers by just making fun of wine when they came into the venue I was working at, just as a challenge to throw down. And but I mean, I love anything made by somebody who cares, from gin through to shochu through to sake, anything.
Yeah, excellent. So with that in mind, we'll jump back over to Andrew. So Andrew Childs, you run Behemoth Brewing.
Yeah, I founded Behemoth Brewing about 7.5 years ago, and we just love making beer that has really big flavors. Talking about like the communications, we have fun with our marketing. I don't even like calling it marketing. It's mainly just things that I make up that I think are fun. And we've had our beer Varna session in the last 2 days has been Simpson themed. Haven't had a cease and desist yet, but we have a lot of fun with it. And yeah, I met Wayne quite a few years ago when at Bisu, and he was running in Auckland, and I really got into sake that way. And Wayne loves good beer, and he really got. I've always been a fan of sake, but Wayne really taught me about a lot of the nuances in it and the variety. And yeah, it's like every alcohol category that you can, there's a lot of scope in every alcohol category, and I'm just a fan of alcohol that's made well, and has depth and nuance and is well made.
Yeah, absolutely. So
when Andrew talks about his marketing, you should definitely do yourself a favor and check out some of the labels that he's done. They're pretty entertaining.
We like it. Beer's got to be fun. Yeah. I guess that's one of the things that a craft beer does really well, is that it brings fun, maybe more than most categories. And I think some other alcohol categories have kind of taken that up a little bit and have made some of their marketing a little bit more fun than they used to. And I think that's probably one of the things that craft beer's brought to the alcohol world.
Absolutely. And that's something that the idea of something just being, at the end of the day, it's supposed to be an enjoyable experience.
Yeah.
It's something that it'll put a smile on your face and go out and have a good time. And there can be a lot of baggage. Tradition is super, super important, but there can also be a lot of baggage in that as well too.
Yeah.
And so it becomes kind of tough to kind of break free of some of those chains and just feel, free enough to be able to go out there and just be like, we're going to go do this because it seems like a good idea. It's going to put a smile on my face, and hopefully in the process, a whole lot of other people's as well. And having that be enough,
Yeah.
I come on a step back just a little bit here, just to kind of give folks a little bit of context. So looking at just sort of New Zealand and New Zealand wine in general, where does Wayne? So where does kind of New Zealand wine sit for you? I mean, you're in a position here. You're here in Japan. You're pushing New Zealand wine to a market that is traditionally, for a long time, has a strong association with French wines. Here you can get New Zealand wine, at the supermarket, or it's readily available, but it's not necessarily something that has really permeated culture here. Kind of what is just kind of you want to just kind of break down a little bit for us to just what's the New Zealand wine market all about, and kind of what makes it unique?
We're a young country, basically. Like it's about 900 years ago, there weren't any people in New Zealand. There weren't even any mammals, I think, maybe only bats. But it's a very, very young country, and the people who immigrated there, we only really started making wine seriously fairly recently. But they came in with people who were doing it for the right reasons as well. These were people that needed wine for their meals and stuff. A lot of people from Croatia, Dalmatia in particular. And it's almost like over the last 30, 40 years, everybody in New Zealand's just decided to concentrate on quality over quantity. So they've spent a lot of time in Europe learning from France and learning from the Italians and the Spanish and the other countries around Germany as well in particular. And we've been able to go quite quickly, I think, up the ranks of quality by learning from the best people out there. We don't have the space to mass produce wine. So most of the companies that are making the wine are family owned, I think, and strong sustainability. What that actually ends up meaning is that New Zealand wine is per average, it's actually the most expensive wine in the world. But if you were to take an average bottle of New Zealand wine, chances are it's going to be the best one out of the average countries as well, because of the reasons that I said. It's handmade. It's everything that makes these small sake breweries amazing. Is the same sort of, the people who are making it are craftsmen, the family people. They care, and so I sort of think that New Zealand sits comfortably at the very top of the world with making the best wine in the world, and by that, I don't mean that we make better wine than other countries. I mean, if you have the best wine from New Zealand and put it up against the best wine from France and America and pretty much everywhere else, you're going to be personal preference is what's going to get there. And blind tastings around the world, you've got countries like Chile winning, New Zealand winning. It's not always the old world that wins anymore. Maybe 40 years ago, yes, but not so much now. And so that's the kind of image and the message that we try and get across, is to just challenge people to try it. And that's where I sort of feel like it links in quite well with what I was doing back in New Zealand and Australia with the sakes. People don't really understand what it is, but when you get them to taste it, then they don't need to listen to me and my obviously biased opinions. They can just trust what's in their mouth.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I guess your geographical location and some of those limitations and some of those factors, of course, are going to come into play with regards to price and what you can do and where you should look for markets and things like that, for sure. But it kind of, I feel like it also, in a way, it kind of gives you a little bit of freedom as well. When you get a little bit, it's obviously rooted in a lot of the traditional winemaking practices, the understanding of, what's been built upon hundreds of thousands of years. But then all of a sudden, when you're in the context of New Zealand, what sort of freedoms does that afford?
People are often asking me, what type of food does New Zealand do? And it's like, whatever we feel like, like as a cocktail bartender, if you wanted to chuck in some yuzu with wasabi, with garam masala, with mezcal, do it if it tastes nice. And if you look at an area like Hawke's Bay in particular, I think you've got great varieties that are growing side by side and working because the winemaker feels that they can make that work. Whereas if you were to sort of do that in most of the European countries, because of the systems that have gone in place, they are quite restrictive. Not necessarily good or bad, it's just the reality of the situation. And that's some of the best, most interesting wines you find from Europe are wines that have chosen, the wine grower, winemaker has chosen to step outside of those restrictions and just make what they feel like. New Zealand is totally free with that. It is one of the risks, because sometimes we do mad things that don't really work, but every once in a while, we might pull off some sort of amazing blend that is not not expected or anticipated, and then we can change something.
Yeah, so absolutely, and I feel like that's really important. That idea that it's okay to just kind of go for it, and that's an entirely viable option. And so,
yeah,
and that's something I feel like a lot of folks forget, especially when it gets to communicating sake. How can you just kind of it's have that freedom to be like, why am I going to do this? Because it seems like a good idea, and I feel like the craft, that's kind of a liberty that not only the New World, but a lot of the craft beer industry really has as well too.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, Andrew, I kind of want to jump over to you for a second. I'm just kind of want to couch today's conversation, and just a little bit of background for our listeners. I think we have a lot of sake folks, which I imagine translates to a lot of craft beer folks and wine folks and, and craft spirits folks as well too. But to just kind of give everybody a little bit of context. You said, you've been doing Behemoth for about the last 7 years or so. You were in beer in some capacity before that as well. Can you just tell us just a little bit about sort of the nature of the craft beer market? Where are we kind of looking at from producer, product angles, sort of market growth? What's that market look like right now?
So New Zealand, we've got a relatively long craft beer history, but a short one at the same time. It's weird. So, the founders of New Zealand European model settlement, we had the native Māori people who had been here for a very long time, but Captain Cook, who came over here, bought his own beer and bought brewing techniques and stuff over with them, with those guys, and it's been here ever since. But until about 15, 20 years ago, it was pretty much all relatively bland New Zealand lager, which is kind of a sweet amber lager that's about 4%. We had really bad historic drinking laws and drinking culture brought over from England. We in the 80s, we had a thing called the 6 o'clock swill, which all bars had to close at 6 o'clock. So everyone got off work at 5 and drank as much as they could for an hour, and then went home and beat their wives, which was pretty horrible. So things have changed a lot, and once we had a lot of breweries and they got bought up by the big boys, and then the same kind of thing happened in America a long time ago as well. But now, fast forward, we have about 200 brewing companies in New Zealand for a population of about 5 million, which per head of population is, what I hear, more than the UK, but it's somewhat debatable. But it's a lot. And I think in the last, we've been around 7 years, but even in the last 5 years, it's nearly doubled, and the growth has been significant. Craft beer has gone from a small group of people, which I was involved with, the beer geeks in Wellington, and less so in Auckland, but growing more there. And now it's mainstream. Ourselves, we're in every one of there's 2 supermarket chains in New Zealand, and we're in every one of the New Zealand owned ones. So, towns big or small in New Zealand, you can get good beer. And even 3 years ago, that wasn't the case. So the growth is huge. Post COVID, obviously bars have had the trouble with, I've just been at a beer festival, which not many people in the world can say.
That's what I was wondering at first. That was amazing.
Behemoth is actually the biggest beer festival in the world this year, mainly because it's one of the only
no competition.
ones. Yeah, there's no competition on that. New Zealand thrives on being the biggest in things when no one else is doing it. Or per head of population, New Zealand's awesome at most things because there's bugger all people here. So yeah, it's a really, it's a growing industry, and it's thriving. We're up. I'm privy to some of the supermarket data here, and beer is up 25% this year, and it's the first time it's been up more than 5% in the last decade. And that's from supermarkets. Obviously, people drinking at home more. We started a Facebook page called Saving the World with Couch Beers. Wayne's also part of it as well. And it's the biggest craft beer group in New Zealand now. I started in bed on a Sunday morning, and it's kind of taken on a life of its own. But yeah, people are using beer to become more connected, and being a part of something. And it's great. The varieties of beer is massive. There's definitely some big styles. You would see me drinking a hazy IPA here. Obviously, one of the most fastest growing styles in the world for craft beer in general. Even the big boys all of the big boys are making this style of beer now.
Yeah.
And it's a fast evolving industry. I'm sure I'll talk about it more, but I think we'll probably do about 80 to 90 brand new beers this year.
Wow.
So to say that it grows, it moves fast is kind of an understatement.
Yeah, I'm curious. I want to get back to that that sort of that idea of growth and just volume and product lineup and sort of what that means to kind of put that in the market. But I'm gonna jump back to Wayne here for a second, because I want to talk a little bit, get back to wine a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about your bar, your establishment. So it's kind of unique in that it's craft sake and New Zealand wine, and I know you've got some New Zealand, Australian craft beers and things like that as well too, on offer. And you're kind of in a position where you're bringing wine from a region that generally doesn't have a lot of prevalence. And at the same time, I would argue sake, which in Japan, honestly, probably has about an equal level of understanding and prevalence probably in the market for a lot of the people who are going to visit. And you have to proposition them as to, one, why they would choose one or the other, just wine or sake, but then also given the depth and breadth of the different styles and sort of what's available, how you communicate to them the value of that product and sort of what sort of information do you kind of lean on, and what do you borrow from wine, and what do you lean into, and the kinds of things you also avoid as well.
Yeah, I don't shy away from the fact that, like, from a wine point of view, New Zealand is the most expensive, but there are reasons for that. And it's not because of a distortion in the market of fashion. New Zealand is not fashionable for wine. So the quality is because of sustainability. It's because of organic farming. It's because of most things. Like there's a lot of craftsmanship, that kind of thing. And once you kind of get past that, don't compare me on price. And if you do compare me with a relatively expensive bottle of Europe, and then you'll realize that there's a reason why there's a price difference between a average family car and a Ferrari. It's like they're functionally the same, but they're also pretty clearly different. And Japan is an interesting one to go back to sake as well, because a lot of the locals, like you say, don't really know so much about it, and they're prepared to pay 5,000 yen for a bottle of wine from France because it's from France, as opposed to 5,000 yen on a bottle of sake would just be like, oh, that's mad. I can get something from the convenience store for like 400 yen. You're like, yeah, they're not the same. And trying to get people to understand the differences and directly challenging them on those differences. I guess one of the problems with Japan and sake is what the gentleman yesterday said, where he mentioned that familiarity kind of breeds, maybe he didn't say contempt, but along those words, like people take sake for granted in Japan, and there's a certain amount of fascination with the rest of the world, which is the quite opposite, where in New Zealand people are fascinated with Japan and just think that New Zealand wine is normal because they all taste like that. It's getting those sort of stories and understanding across that. One of the sake breweries that I worked at for a short period of time, Kozaemon, they were starting work at 4 o'clock in the morning and they finished work at 11 o'clock at night, and they did that every single day. You should pay for that. Like they deserve a life, and if we don't look after the craftsmen and women, then we will lose the beauty of the small producer and what they bring to the table. Everything will end up tasting homogenized. Everything will taste a little bit boring. And if you're just looking for price, if you're just looking to get intoxicated, it's one of the great things about Japan is you can buy strong zero from the convenience store. You can get a cheap bottle, but if that's all you're looking for, don't drink this stuff. But if you want, I believe everybody will gravitate to quality after they kind of understand why. And that's sort of the underlying thing of what we're trying to do here is represent the producers, because they can't be here to, and sort of, I guess, like an art facilitator, we want to be able to get across to the consumer why this is priced the way this is priced.
I think one way of doing that is branding. And I was just thinking, like, one of the best industries to kind of learn about how to brand a product would probably be, right now, would probably be the craft beer industry. So it's kind of a question for Andy, like, what do you think sake can learn from craft beer about branding, and how would you go about branding sake to increase its value?
It would be really interesting to see sake branded like craft beer. I mean, we're in the extreme. We do some pretty crazy labels. We have a character. This is a brand new printed can that's been labeled Me Time Mosaic. So Me Time's a series of single hopped hazy IPAs. This particular one won the best IPA in New Zealand this year, which we're extremely proud of.
Congratulations.
And
Send some over.
we've got some recently, mate. It's taken me 7 years to get beer to Japan. Do you
Nice
remember
one.
right at the beginning, mate?
Yeah, I remember. Very cool.
Yeah, it's taken us a long time, but I think we've got another lot coming over soon. But yeah, I don't know if you can go to the same. I wouldn't like to say extremes, but our brand's very colourful. We have a character, Shirley, he dresses up as different things. I'm not saying that sake should do exactly the same thing. It might not work, but you can definitely maybe bring a bit more creativity and a bit more flair and a bit more fun.
There are some breweries.
There are a lot of breweries doing, not the same as what we're doing, but bringing more colourfulness and more fun to it. And there are starting to be some wineries that are doing something similar.
Yeah.
A lot more designs, and if wine's catching on to it, there's no reason that sake can't do something similar in a Japanese style, or in a style, if it's we have one guy doing sake in New Zealand doing some fun stuff. But why not? Why can't sake? I know there might be some traditional Japanese people who won't like it, but pushing the boundaries and just making it more accessible and maybe more in tune with what people like these days.
Do you think that the seasonality, or maybe not the season, but the limited time that your beers are available for, do you think that helps to create a certain amount of excitement or fun as well, driving the demand? Because like you do your random like crazy interesting beers for one run, and they're on the supermarket for a short period of time. Yeah, because I think that's maybe something sake can learn from.
Yeah, I mean, so we've got a core range that does well of 10 beers that really do well, but having maybe different polishing times, different types of rice, and all the things that make sake, different yeast. I think yeast could be a big thing for sake as well, and I think with all alcoholic beverages, yeast brings one of the biggest characters, and I think that's especially true in sake and wine. And just playing around with it, you've got to have a core range. You've got to have something that people come back to, 100%. But if you have that limited release, you got to get this a short run. It definitely builds hype and excitement around it. And we're not the first people to do that in the beer world, and we won't be the last. But it is something potentially that sake and wine could build into as well.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to ask you about, they kind of touched upon, as far as one thing that sake does have, it does have that seasonality. It does have seasonal releases. That's something that's actually very much ingrained into it. Getting that product overseas, because it's not a major market, getting it over there, getting it in rotation, getting it on the shelves, actually getting that in a real timely manner with some logistical challenges sometime in the near future as it develops, I think more to the degree that, if you have a local craft beer market that sustain that, you can sustain that kind of heavy rotation, which might be a little bit challenging right now. But at the same time, one thing you were talking about, the IPA that you held up, you're saying, well, this is tell me about that IPA again real quick that you were holding.
So Me Time Mosaic. So Me Time blatantly is time for a hop to be able to get to know itself and stuff, Chili sitting on the couch with a beer and a pack of chips, crisps, no matter where you're from. But it's to get to know that single hop, and we're about to do our 6th version of this. The reason that this is in a printed can and a 6-pack is we won best IPA in New Zealand, and we've made lots of it now and very much in demand. but it's a showcase of a certain hop variety. So I think the same thing can be done with, I mean, that doesn't happen very often in beer, but obviously it does in wine, Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, all sorts of wine varieties, but also could be a thing with, we've taken this certain type of sake rice or the certain type of yeast and use it as a showcase. And this is very rare. Like, there's not many people, like, there's a few people, Brewdog and Stone and stuff, have done single hop varieties around the world, but it's something that's a bit of fun. And to be fair, most beers are better when you have hop blends, but these ones very much showcase a certain hop variety. And there's a lot of hop heads around the world that just want to see what that hop variety tastes like. So
yeah, well, that's what I kind of want to talk about. So there's actually, looking at the can, you've got meat time, so you got your titles, then you got Mosaic, single hop, hazy IPA. When you actually break it down, there's a lot to unpack in there. As far as to what that is, there's a lot of vocabulary, and you've got where you're at. You have a pretty mature craft beer market that's out there looking for that. But arguably, how many people actually understand what all those words mean, and how does that translate to a beer? Sort of, how do you tie together when you were saying you do 200 plus releases a year? How do you tie together? I mean, there's a lot of vocabulary, and then together with, they were saying meat time, how do you, when you've got so many beer choices in general, and then even when you just got a lot of beers right there, how do you sort of tie that together? Because I mean, that sort of communication, that's a communication challenge that I think sake has as well. Is there's a lot of vocabulary. There's this wild lexicon that a lot of people don't have a lot of familiarity with. But right, for craft beer, it's actually become really integral to kind of the appeal. So I'm wondering kind of how you bridge that gap.
Well, much easier in New Zealand that most people speak English, so that's that. makes it hard. It makes it a lot easier. But we export to this quite a few places, but and especially in Southeast Asia and Asia. It is more, and to be fair, most people don't know, but like the beer geeks get it. There's a lot of social media. The amount of like untapped craft beer's got a thing where there's like a massive thing where people check in beers, and there's a lot of beer geeks. Craft beer and social media is a massive thing that sake have been able to tap into as much as craft beer has. It's quite crazy, and there's a lot of rabid beer geeks out there that that they're obsessed with it. There's collecting, well, something that Japan could identify as like craft beer is like collecting Pokemon. It's very much as like gotta catch them all. Yeah. And people want to try everything, and FOMO is a real thing. But it's also just that I want to try this hop, and I want to see what that does. I want to, they want to enjoy it and drink the beer, but they also want a story and want to feel involved, and they want to know that they've kind of not necessarily learned something, but they've been able to appreciate something different.
Do you think the single size that you can purchase at the supermarket, you can go in and just buy a can, and then you can maybe go in, and if you have like 3 beers a night with your friends, that's not too much. But if you get 3 full-size bottles of sake, maybe you've gone too far, and you can't do that side-to-side comparison. Do you think that's something that might be a good plan? A smaller serve of quality.
Smaller serve of quality would be, I think, would change the culture though. Like, so we most of our new releases are in 440ml cans. This one's in a 330ml because it's gone to a 6-set, just because it got to that level of popularity, and we wanted people to buy more of it. Sorry, beer festival cough, not COVID. Yeah, so smaller serving sizes for sake or wine could work better. But also you've got the other thing that even a small serving size is still a lot more alcohol than your average thing. So it's more of a commitment. It's one of the beauties of beer is that it's approachable because of its alcohol, even though we do some high alcohol stuff. Rather than sake and wine, it's harder to be able to have as many varieties because there's only so much you can drink. So that's the challenge, I think, is to do something, and why even like spirits and any other alcohol that's not beer is not being able to do the same thing as craft beer is because its size, its alcohol, and how it's drunk in a social setting are different than all those other alcohol categories.
I have a question. How do the beer, so-called, if there is such a thing, beer traditionalists take to this design? Because I'm not a big beer drinker, but I mean, I kind of know what a beer can looks like. And when I look at that beer can, I mean, I love it. It would get me drinking beer, I think. But it kind of doesn't, when I see that, it doesn't scream beer at me. And like one concern that you always have when you're trying to change the label or change the design, especially with sake bottles as well, is that you make them look a little bit too much like something else, that people no longer kind of see them and associate them with sake. But what has the reaction been from beer traditionalists?
I think if you tried to change all of them overnight, it wouldn't work. Right. I think it's going to be an evolutionary thing. If graphics started being a little bit more, if I thought about traditional Japanese comics or anime or something like that, if it started to go a little bit more that way, not like went from like, just went from words, Japanese characters on a bottle to anime overnight, it'd be weird and it wouldn't work. Right. But if it started incorporating some of those things slowly over time, then it might evolve and make it a little bit more fun.
A hybrid evolution.
A hybrid, and it kind of maybe went to a different audience, like I'm not saying everything should be, full on Harajuku girl straight away onto it or anything like that,
There is one brewery going that way.
I'm not surprised. But I think that it can start over time to wine in New Zealand. There's definitely a lot more people who've got characters and fun and really fun names. I'm not going to lie, puns in English, if you're a sake company in English, start with puns. Everyone loves a pun.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, play on words.
We started to build names that are more fun and then into characters that are more fun. Sorry.
But Japanese culture is really popular overseas, and you touched on anime and manga, and that's the thing that hooked me into Japan and made me want to study Japanese. So, if I think
things like I loved, the only reason I didn't get a massive grasp of Japanese is I hated my teacher in third form Japanese at the beginning of high school. I studied Japanese for travelers before I traveled to Japan, and now I'm blatantly like, most of my Japanese is just saying oishides to my servers when I have a Japanese restaurant or something. I'm very, very, very little on it, but I think it's just that slow translation of maybe bring over some of the more fun things of Japanese culture into, or more acceptable that most people have. Like, I'd buy a Shinkansen sake because I love Shinkansen. Like that kind of random stuff that could bring more people into it who have been to Japan or like things that are Japanese, or something that's like, this beer is made for sushi. Obviously, sushi is the most popular thing that has been exported for but if you can incorporate this is a thing you're meant to have with sushi or something like that, incorporating things that people know about the culture into an amazing drink, I think that's the way forward.
We've seen some breweries doing that, right? There's a bottle that's designed like a koi. In Niigata, right?
Yeah.
And I think a train shaped like a Shinkansen would be really cool.
Yeah, they're working on it.
I'd buy that. I'd buy it.
Yes. I want to kind of go back to Wayne a little bit. You were touching earlier upon, so there's this really kind of fun dynamic aspect to play with that really resonates. That people forget that's a whole massive market out there where you've got just the idea of surprise and enjoyment and kind of that playfulness that just resonates with people regularly. They're willing to go out and, they want to be a part of that experience and be able to use that. You also, you touched earlier upon when you were talking about the nature of New Zealand wine, and when you were talking about also sake brewing, the idea of the craft, the dedication, these people working 15-hour days, putting in the time, putting in the blood, sweat, and tears. And then when you're talking about New Zealand wine, you're talking about ideas of, well, you said, it's a relatively newer, kind of more dynamic market. It's ideas of craft and craftsmanship that sell it. It's sustainability, it's organic and things like that. And I feel like a lot of times maybe sake looks to the old world with sort of this assumption that those things coincide with tradition. And while in many cases they do, the markets that are sustaining a lot of these new world products, it's this idea of, how to say, craft and craftsmanship, and those types of ideas, and that actually that's something that's not just, it's not a sales point. I mean, it's baked into the kind of the DNA of how that that market was built. And so do you, for example, like in your bar, is that, you know, where are there ties between them, sort of maybe how you communicate wine or New Zealand wine together with, you know, up against, not up against sake, but side by side, parallel with sake? Sort of how are those comparisons, and how do you share that sort of that idea of craftsmanship?
It's important to get across to people and to kind of challenge them, you know, like we're very specific on what we offer and what we sell, and sometimes people just walk in and ask for a generic bottled beer and you sort of have to stop and kind of go, did you look around, mate? Did you notice that this is clearly different from every other venue you've been in tonight? And kind of challenging them to recognize that they've got an opportunity to just have a drink, or they've got an opportunity to maybe have something different. And my job as a sommelier is to know about alcohol and service. So it's one of the things, being able to hopefully bridge a gap. If someone comes in and they want to drink sake, and then I have to ask them questions. I can't just say, oh, this is what I like. And if somebody normally drinks a particular style of wine, I need to know what that fundamentally means from a flavor profile, from an intensity, the assumptions I can make if someone tends to drink aged Bordeaux, or if somebody tends to drink like a very elegant type of whiskey, or all of those sorts of things, and trying to tie that in. Because I do believe that there's going to be something in the fridge here, whether it's sake or wine or spirits, that you're going to love. And when you walked in the door, you might not have recognized that that's what you were after. But when you leave, maybe you'll realize, I never realized that sake had that sort of acidity, or I never knew that a double kijoshu even existed, let alone tasted as good as that. And then I guess from a hospitality point of view, we can get across to people is that it should be fun. Wine in particular, there's a lot of snobbery associated to it, and that makes people afraid. But if you meet the winemakers, they're literally down to earth people. They like literally got dirt in their hands. They're super, super friendly. They just want you to understand why they do what they do and what they feel when they do it. And I think that that's one of the things that got me sort of into sake as well, is when I met some of the brewers, and it's almost like they needed help to get the message out there, because people, they were fighting the good fight, but people didn't know. And asking those questions to be able to shift somebody from one beverage category into another. Obviously, they have to be open to the idea. If they're highly resistant, it's like, yeah, sweet mate, there's your gin and generic tonic. But if they want to try something different, my job as a facilitator is to read them as best I can. And I guess also it's lucky being the owner. If someone's having difficulty deciding what to drink, just give them a taste, and don't necessarily tell them which one's more expensive, because that if they choose the cheapest one, it's the only thing that's important is whether you like it or not.
Yeah, lucky them in that scenario, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if I could drink some of those generic beers that Andrew was talking about a little bit earlier, I'd have a lot more money. But they just didn't tick my boxes, you know. Like I always wanted to try more interesting, more exciting things, and I guess I'm glad that the way that panned out. But yeah, I drink Ken Mugi at home, you know, like I like it. I'm not embarrassed, but you can, if you enjoy the cheapest of the products out there, then everybody's happy. You're lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to, real quick, we got about 10 minutes left or so here. And one thing I did kind of want to touch on a little bit, I'm curious, how's wine consumption, just, you know, kind of the current situation aside, COVID aside, what are kind of wine consumption and drinking patterns at home in New Zealand? Do you, just in general?
Excessive, probably.
All alcohol is excessive, but wine and beer is growing, but beer is growing more than any other alcohol category in New Zealand.
Yeah.
This year with COVID.
We tend to drink too much. It's kind of in our cultural DNA, as Andy sort of alluded to earlier before, but I guess it's bred a lot of people that can handle a lot of alcohol.
We didn't have to drink green tea to survive lack of clean water. It's more alcohol in our genetics, and both your genetics as well, actually.
And Andrew sort of alluded to it before as well, but say 10 years ago, 5 years ago, if you went into the supermarket in New Zealand, you didn't have a very good selection of beer. Now, if you go into a supermarket in New Zealand, you've got hundreds of craft beer to choose from. The wine selection is massive and also really, really good. So New Zealand production, New Zealand does not have a history of aging their wines very much. We have a tendency to buy the bottle and drink it that day.
Yeah.
So there's no, very, very few people are likely to be like the European kind of style where they tap into their cellar and bring out a wine that they bought 20, 30 years ago. Yeah. It's more like in New Zealand, you bring out a wine you bought 20, 30 minutes ago. And so we do have a culture, I guess, of drinking it, but that's evolving pretty quickly as well. Before, people just asked for a white wine, and now they're asking for, do you have a Pinot Gris from insert name here? It's a similar type of thing. As you said, the evolution of people knowing how to read those labels, it didn't happen overnight. It happened from sommeliers and companies making small steps until maybe we hit a critical mass where people kind of went, it's actually possible to drink this and enjoy it and appreciate it. Whereas before, like, we're just getting drunk.
Yeah.
And I believe that we're definitely heading in the right direction.
Yeah. And for that, because having stuff at home, that's something the sake industry is still really trying to crack overseas. It's been very much dependent on restaurants, and dining, and the ability to kind of shift it into the home and be able to have a proposal for that. It's interesting you said that New Zealand has a kind of a culture of tending to drink wines young, or to bring them home, drink them that day. You're getting them because you want them now. Yeah. That's a lot. The communication from a lot of sake producers is that, that's kind of ideal. So it's actually, you've got this idea, if that's a culture that actually has that, that's in a way for a lot of producers, that would be a very ideal consumption pattern or consumption.
There is a pricing issue, or not issue, but component to it as well, because the volume that's going into New Zealand and Australia, I'd say the same thing, is not, the pricing has to be high because each bottle, there's more of the transport component and those sorts of things. And it does push it into a category that if you don't know what it tastes like, you're taking a gamble by purchasing it. Right. And that's the sort of difficult zone that a lot of the sake is in New Zealand at the moment, is without having somebody there to actually give you a taste and talk you through it. And there are some supermarkets that actually have sommeliers working now. That's the sort of situation where they would be able to give you a taste and go, oh yeah, you should try this. Have you thought about trying this? And then when people actually taste it, they'll like, you can buy a really good bottle of wine in New Zealand for $10. And I don't think sake should be competing on pricing. And the best, really good, global standards. For New Zealand, it's just kind of normal. But the sake, the cheapest of the sakes is going to come in at a different price point, which it should be in. It's just, people will be like, oh, I feel like something to go with the meal. And most of the time they haven't even thought of sake. And if they do, they'll look at it, not know what it is because they haven't had the taste. And so that's a factor. But it's very difficult for individual breweries to do that. That's one of the things I hope that maybe the government might be able to throw some cash at, to do a concerted effort, because it's a situation where the rising tide will lift all boats, like if people start to think about sake as an option, then that'll be a step in the right direction. But how you get that is by actually being there to give them little tasters, the way that you do see in Japan, but you don't see overseas, or at least in the countries I've been to.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to, I guess, that's exactly what you say. It's very different from beer. You have this culture of drinking wine at home, and particularly drinking beer at home. It's something that it's not new. You don't have to convince anybody to do it. So there's a big disparity there between that and anything that sake is trying to do. But one thing that is really interesting about beer in the craft beer market is, even 10, 15, 20 years ago, not just the number of options you had available to you, but it was generally you pick up at least from the U.S., from the West Coast of the U.S., you can go pick up a 12-pack for $12. You can pick up a 24-pack for $16. It's not great, but it's out there, and there's a culture around that. Whereas now, high quality beers, I mean, you're asking people to go and spend, in a lot of cases, maybe it might be $7 or $8 on a beer, you know,
Yeah.
or there is a market to get people to spend, even with across many, many different products, spend $15 or $18 or $20 on a beer. What kind of spurred that, and I'm sort of curious, Andrew, what in the supermarket or in these places where you've got all these options, kind of how did that breadth grow, and then how do you go when you're putting a beer, say at a higher price point on the market? How do you differentiate that product when there's so many out there?
Yeah, so we on average have the highest price point craft beer in New Zealand now, which is, you know, I think a good place to be in the market. Yeah. As I said before, most of our new releases are 440ml cans, and we're looking at very, very cheapest 9, but more average 10 to 12 New Zealand dollars a can. And
I think it's about 700 yen, maybe.
Higher than when you were here, Wayne.
Yeah.
Times have changed. And yeah, no, higher ABV, higher amount of hops for our very hoppy beers. A lot of sour beers have come in, and we've got massive fruit components. And really just see where supply and demand meets. Like, you know, our higher price point ones are very limited. Higher in alcohol in New Zealand's alcohol, our excise tax is done per litre of pure alcohol. So higher the ABV, the higher the tax. So yeah, we just see where those two meet. And you know, you have some people like, well, I don't want to pay that amount, and then a lot more people who do. So we always sell out. So, you know, that's just where it is. I think we've just where the value is. You know, we put the good things in, and people get the hoppy grin. That's kind of where we've ended up. But we're always pushing the boundaries of how much we can put, how much ingredients and how much flavor we can put into a beer, and where consumers are happy to spend money on something that's worth it. And that's where we've ended up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, gentlemen, we've been going at it for about 50 minutes or so here. We're gonna have to wind down for a quick sec, but just kind of in just a second here, but just kind of real quick, just a minute or two before we kind of sign out here. If you've got any message just kind of based on your home field where you're at, looking at beer, looking at wine in the bar, kind of in the market, if you got any final kind of message for producers out there that are, you know, looking at maybe the new world or communication or something you'd like them to kind of take away with them. Andrew, how about you, sir?
I just think create value and create something unique, something yourself, something that's not copying other people, something that you can bring to the party. And there are a few people in New Zealand doing it real differently, and then other people that I admire are doing it a different way than we do it. You know, it's more than one way to skin a cat. Yeah. And, you know, if you can bring something that's delicious, people love, people really get invested in, then you can do well. That, and you know, work your ass off and not take any days off, etc. And yeah, you can do it right in craft beer in New Zealand. And I think that other categories like sake can do similar.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Wayne, how about you, sir?
Yeah, I sort of feel like there's sometimes it's Japanese brewers are sometimes a little bit intimidated by the history and tradition of France in particular. And like, we've got breweries in Japan that have been running for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years in the same family. That's something that I feel they should own. So I just hope that there's a shift away from using the lowest common denominator of price to owning that space more in a semi-arrogant touch, or confident touching on arrogant way of saying, my family's been doing this for hundreds of years. This is what we do. This is our story. This is what we put into it. And that in a way will help to position it in a customer's mind a little bit. You've set them up. Whereas if it's like, I'll try this one because it's the cheapest one, it's like, well, yeah, this is why, there's a reason why it's cheap. So I sort of hope that we can get that message across, that that these guys, these ladies, these craftsmen are really putting their heart and soul, and you're buying a work of art as opposed to just a way of getting drunk.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I appreciate you making time. I know, Andrew, after a long marathon yourself, I appreciate you staying up with us here. Best of luck to you. I know things are getting a little bit challenging all over the place. Keep up the good work. Keep making some great beer, and I hope we can be down to pay you a visit on your island here in the near future.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for the time.
Yeah. Yeah, Wayne, thanks so much. Yeah, for helping us put this together. For folks who are in Tokyo, when you do get the chance to visit, or for those who are already here, where's your bar at, Wayne?
We're in Yushima, so it's a couple of minutes walk from Yushima Station, Ochinomizu Station. We're kind of smack bang in the middle of Suihirocho, Ochinomizu, and Yushima. So it's a pretty close walk, and we do have some things that are fairly expensive. We've got some things that are cheaper, but we should be able to tick most boxes unless you want to drink strong zero.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you so much, guys, for spending time with us here this afternoon. Look forward to seeing you and chatting with you again here very soon.
Awesome.
All right. Hey, take care, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks.